Good morning, everybody. This is Whitney over at Health Trust Software. We are going to go ahead and start our 10 o'clock webinar this morning. Today we are going to talk about care validation. If any of you are having trouble with any audio or hearing me, remember to just send me a question and let me know, or send me a message and let me know, and we can make sure that we get your audio fixed up. Now, once you've logged into the system, since we're talking about care validation today, the first things that we actually want to look at are going to be some different company settings. Now, some company settings that we have available to us will allow us basically to choose either kind of a newer version or the current version of our care validation that we actually implemented with an update, I believe, a month ago. Or you can just use, I think the 2012 version is what we call it, of care validation. And there are a couple of differences between the two. So we'll actually walk through how to set those up in the company settings and how you guys can use each of those screens. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at is going to be our Administration tab, and we're going to choose Company Settings. Now, in the company settings, you have several tabs across the very top. The tab that we're going to be looking for to make changes to this care validation screen is going to be the Components tab. Towards the top, actually, as you scroll down towards the middle of the page, you'll see this care validation option. And this will just give you a simple drop-down box to allow you to switch between the current version and the version 2012. I'm going to leave mine on the current version, and we're going to walk through the steps on how to use the care validation screen with the current version, and then we'll actually change it to the version 2012 and walk through those steps as well. Once you've selected the option that you want, scroll back up to the top of your screen and click Submit to save that information. Now, you may need to log out of the system and then log back in order to view these changes. Before our webinar started, I actually logged out and logged back in, so my changes have already taken effect. So I'm going to immediately go to my Compliance tab and then choose Care Validation. Up at the very top of the Care Validation screen, you'll see an option that allows you to use different filters to determine what you see here. Now, with this current version of the Care Validation screen, what we've done is we've grouped together the types of visits, or group together all of the visits or charges in your system by the types of visits that they are. Now, most of you guys won't be seeing different disciplines and things on here as far as, private duty nursing, occupational therapy, pediatric occupational therapy, unless your actual agency provides all of those different types of services. I'm actually in my test database, so I have a number of different services listed here. And out to the right-hand side of each type of visit, you're going to be able to see the number of visits that are in there. Now, on any of these gray bars, you can actually click on them to drop down a list of visits that are within that specific discipline. So, for example, right here we have 3 Start of Care OASIS assessments. I can just simply click on that gray bar, and that's going to tell me my patient's name, the employee who did the visit. Over here to the left-hand side, I'll be able to see the date of service that the visit was done. And then over to the right-hand side, I'll be able to see the current status of that visit. So as you can see here, this visit has been failed. Now, since this has been failed, not only can I see that status, but I also can see my comment that I had added back to that nurse. So please accept my changes, go in and fix, ... You can open up more than one of these tabs if you would like. Now remember, each of these pages can also be customized so that specific people in specific security groups can only see maybe OASIS visits, or if you have one person that goes in and only validates or only reviews the routine visits. You can actually go in to administration and groups and customize those group settings and select the types of visits or the different disciplines that you want that particular group to have access to. Once you actually had selected that gray bar, if there's a new one in here that you need to validate, you'll notice that that date of service date is underlined. By clicking on that underlined date, that's going to take me into the Validate Visit page where I can review, if it's an OASIS, the OASIS analysis here, any warnings on this warnings page. I can click on the Field Validation tab to actually go into the visit. Now I'm going to click on Validate Fields because it looks like I already had some changes that I had made on this particular visit. So if you click on Field Validation and get a list of changes, you can use that Validate Fields button to simply go into the visit the same way that your nurse did or therapist did. And you can use the forward and back arrow buttons to move through each page. Now as you're going through, if you're making changes to any of these answers, so making suggestions as far as what you believe that the answer should be, after that you would then fail that visit back to the clinician so that they could accept those answers or go in and make their own corrections. But as you move through these different pages of the assessment, regardless of the discipline, the system is actually recording those changes that you're making. And what it's doing is it's actually creating a list that you can look at and that your clinician can see once you fail that visit back to them so that they can easily accept those corrections. If you'd like to view the list, make sure that you click on the green check mark, and that's going to actually validate the visit. Okay, what this is doing is it's just taking it through a series of checks to make sure that none of the answers that you may have updated or you may want the clinician to update are contradicting any other answers maybe that were answered a specific way during that visit. Now I do have a warning here that shows up, so as you can see, those warnings and error messages will still show up after the system has looked at your answers versus the other answers on that screen or in that visit. And I'm just going to click Submit, and that's going to take me to my list of all of the different fields that I've changed. Over to the left-hand side, you'll actually see the field. You'll be able to see what specific question it was on that page. You'll notice that also that field at the very top, so kind of the title of each page, is going to be underlined. So you can click on it if you wanted to go back to that particular page and just review that question again that you had changed. The current answer column will always tell you what that current answer will be if you were to pass this visit and then print out the visit note. As you can see right here, the current answer is blank, meaning that our clinician didn't answer this, and we suggested that they change the answer to this. The validated answer just tells you again what we want to change the answer to. You also have an add option over to the right-hand side of that validated answer column for any comments that you may want to write to the clinician. Just click on Add, type in this comment here, and then click Submit. This could be a comment about why you suggest that they change the answer to what you've sent them. Maybe it could be a comment about adding a little bit more detail in a specific comment box or an additional box that's in their visit note. The Accepted by Clinician column, you'll actually be able to see kind of in action once they send the visit back to you. We'll look at that just a little bit later. And then to the very right-hand side, you have a Delete column. Now this just simply provides you with a red X so that you can delete it. So for example, if I messed up when I was making a correction and entered in maybe a quantity of 0 on that supply, I can just click on the red X. It asks me if I'm sure I want to delete this field, and I would say OK. That's going to refresh my screen for me, and as you can see, it erased that DME and supply change that I had made. Now again, if I want to go back into the visit the same way that my clinician sees it, I'm going to click on the Validate Fields button, and that's going to take me right into that visit. Now not only can I use the forward and back arrow buttons to move through each page, but I also can use the Quick Jump to Category box just like my clinician did out in the field. Depending on the type of assessment that you're actually reviewing, at the very top you may have different tabs. For example, this is a skilled nursing resumption of care visit, so I have a coding tab at the top that will just quickly jump me to that diagnosis page. Again, I can still use this drop-down box to choose diagnosis and jump to this page, but this tab up here is just a little bit quicker. If I had created a plan of care during this visit, I could also click on the plan of care button. That would take me right into the plan of care page where I could then click on Edit Plan of Care to go in and look at what was answered, or click on View Plan of Care to review that information. Your visit note option is just simply going to open up a PDF file of that documentation. Some people like to scroll through and review that information from a PDF form. Once it loads, you can just scroll through this information. Over to the left-hand side, you'll see just some basic information about that particular visit, the type of visit that was done, the patient's name, the original scheduled date of service, so when your scheduler actually put it on the calendar or the date that your scheduler actually scheduled that visit for, and then your start date and time, which would be when your clinician or when your field staff actually completed that visit. You'll see the employee who did that documentation, the current episode, if there is a current episode for that patient, their payer, if a payer had been entered in on the patient menu, and then you have a section titled Validation Information. Now what this allows you guys to do is, for example, on this OASIS visit, there are different sections like the diagnosis coding, like the plan of care section. So if you have more than one person that's helping review this note for those different sections, maybe you have someone that's just going in and checking the coding, this allows them to actually change that status and either pass or fail the coding section of this particular visit. Now keep in mind that if this is set to fail, this won't actually fail this entire visit. It just lets whoever else know, or whoever else that may be coming in to review this note, maybe look at the overall compliance or validation of this particular note. It just lets them know that the coders have already reviewed this information and they have actually failed it, and maybe they also wrote their comments down here about what needs to be changed. Same thing with the plan of care. If you have someone just reviewing that plan of care, they can pass or fail that particular section, and also the same thing with this compliance status. The most important status that's on this page is going to be your validation status. This is actually what either passes the visit and gets it ready for that billing process, or fails the visit, which would then send it back to your clinician so they could accept your changes or make changes on their own. You can add in your comments to Clinician here. If you've already made the changes as you were moving through some of the pages, you can actually just write in a note maybe that says, please accept my changes. You can also write in a note of maybe different pages that they would need to go and look at. And then if you want to actually fail this back to that clinician, click Submit. That'll refresh your page. And as you can see, it doesn't show up here in our list anymore because it's been failed back to that particular clinician. Now up here in the filter option, if you choose the option that says Show All Visits and click Submit, that will actually show you all of the visits that also are currently failed back to that particular employee or that particular field staff. Or you can also use the different status options here. As a default, we always pull only the not validated visits into this section, or the visits that had been failed, but the clinician has actually sent them back to the office. So usually that means they've accepted your answers or your changes, or they've made the necessary corrections that you needed them to make and sent it back to the office. The other option here is for the status of fail, which will show you all visits that have been failed back to your clinician. Just click Submit to refresh that screen. And then you can scroll back through your visits and select the next one that you wanted to see. Okay, so let's look at some other types of visits that we may have. Now, one thing that I do want to mention while we're looking at some of these OASIS visits is as you're going through and reviewing this information, you're basically checking this information for things that could potentially cause problems in billing. You want to make sure that you're not having to focus on going into every single page. As you all know, or as all of you Medicare agencies know, OASIS visits can be quite lengthy. So if you're looking at every single page of those, validation and compliance or care validation can tend to bottleneck. So you want to make sure that you're not having to go in and review every single page. We actually have another section of the software called our Auditing Section that we'll talk about on Thursday that will show you how you can go in and audit your patient's records, and then you can use that information that you gather during the audit to then have continuing education classes for your nurses or for your therapist or all of your clinicians to help fix some of those problems that maybe you didn't address actually on that individual note. Okay. So again, let's look at some other types of visits. For example, here is a physical therapy evaluation. So I'm going to just select this visit as an example. Now, as you can see, the screens look very similar to the OASIS visit that we just had open. You're going to see the same visit information over here on the left-hand side. You'll still see any warnings. Now, these also are warnings that your clinicians or your field staff are also seeing out in the field. Your field validation simply takes you into that visit note the same way that your clinician did. And then again, you have your visit note option in the upper right-hand corner that's going to pull up a visit note of that particular service or document. Under the validation information, since we're in a physical therapy evaluation, you'll notice that we just have two options here, compliance status and then validation status. I would recommend just using this validation status if only one person is really going to be reviewing this note. You can use the compliance status option if you want to. Still enter in your comments to clinician if you need them to accept your answers or maybe go in and make their own changes, and then click Submit to save that information. Now again, if you've failed that visit, that's actually going to fail that or send that back to that particular clinician. Let me scroll through this list and see if I have a pediatric therapy visit, and I do. So I'm going to click on Pediatric Occupational Therapy Visit, and I'm going to look at this 12/10 date of service. Now, one additional thing that I'd like to mention on our pediatric therapy visits is you'll notice that most of the tabs look the same, except you have an additional supervision tab up here at the top. So if, let's say, an assistant actually went and did this pediatric occupational routine visit, and maybe a supervisor needed to go in and review it, make additional comments, and then actually co-sign that visit note, this is what that supervision tab can be used for. Make sure if you're a supervisor that's reviewing this note that you enter in any comments that you may need to and click Submit to save that information. If you're e-signing, just simply click on the e-sign button. It will ask you if you're sure you want to electronically sign, and then you can just say OK, and that's going to e-sign your name and then put the date in there as well. Again, you have your Submit button at the bottom of the left-hand side so that you can pass or fail that visit. And then you can move on to the next type of visit or the next one that you would need to review. Now let me see if I have one, or if I can quickly find one that has been failed. So it looks like here's one for Dennis Vine that has actually been failed back to the nurse. Corrections needed to be made or needed to be accepted. So I'm actually going to click on this visit, and I'm going to click on Field Validation. Now you'll notice this field validation page looks a little bit different than the original list that we had sent back. The original list was highlighted in all yellow. What this tells us is that's a new change that needs to be made or accepted, basically. Your current answer column, again, is going to show you what currently would print out on that visit note if you were to immediately pass the visit. Your validated answer is what basically that answer needs to be changed to, what you guys have suggested that that answer be changed to. Again, you have your add option here to add in any comments, and then your accepted by clinician column, which helps notify you that they have accepted that change. As you can see, these have a Y right here, meaning that yes, they were accepted by the clinician. If you're having some trouble and for some reason it's not accepting your answer, you can click on the unaccept option. That's just going to simply unaccept that change, turn it yellow again so that you could then fail it back to your clinician and have them try and accept it again. Now some of our changes here are showing up in red. Now what this red color means is basically that they've accepted your change, but they've also gone in and made a change to that particular question themselves. Now you can kind of see how that works by comparing these two columns. Remember, the column on the left is what the answer currently is on their visit. The column on the right is what you suggested their answer be. As long as they've accepted your answer and not made any additional changes to it, this red colored bar would actually end up being kind of a grayish colored bar, and these two columns should be the same. Now this one, as you can see, is showing up in red, and I can see that they accepted my answer, but then they also went in and actually made a change themselves and changed it back to blank. So if I were to pass this visit right now, this answer would show up blank. Again, you have your red X over to the right-hand side to delete any of these changes. You can click on any of the title of the pages to actually open up that page. And then you have your different statuses over here on the left-hand side. Your validation status being the one that actually fails the visit back to the clinician or passes the visit and sends it into a confirmed status. Click Submit again just to save that status, and if you had failed it, it would at that time go back to your clinician. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and go back into my company settings, and I'm going to choose that version 2012 of Care Validation so that we can look and see kind of how the other screen looks compared to the one that we've just been working in. So once I change my setting, I'm going to go to File and Exit and log out of the system. And then I'm going to just log back in so I make sure that it made that change. And then I'm going to click back on Compliance and Care Validation. Now you can see it looks a little bit different. You have your search criteria down here at the bottom instead of having your filter options at the top like we had just seen. And then once you've entered in your search criteria, you can click Search, and that'll refresh this list up here at the top. Now, much like the current version, once you fail a visit back, it actually is removed from this list. And then whenever the clinician accepts those changes or makes those corrections and sends it back to you guys in the office, you'll actually see it reappear with the fail status. Now there are a few additional things that you see in this screen that you didn't see in the current version, and that's going to be these columns over to the right-hand side. This pass column just simply gives you the option to quick pass this visit, so if you don't need to review it, you're just simply passing it. Click on the pass option, and that'll immediately pass that visit and change it into a confirmed status, and then you can move on to your next one. You also will see a last confirmed and a last validated column. The last confirmed column is basically the date and time that that clinician has confirmed that visit and sent it to you in the office. The last validated date and time is the last date and time that you guys in the office have actually selected that visit, made whatever changes, or failed it back to the clinician by clicking Submit. So as you click Submit, as you're going through these visits, the system is updating this last validated column. Now if you're failing visits back to your clinician, these columns can be very helpful because it'll let you know which visits basically have come back from that clinician. So for example, on this visit for Nurse RN here, this PT evaluation, I actually changed it on 11/7 of 2012. It looks like I failed it back to my clinician. And on 11/7 of 2012 at 9:30, so 1 minute after I had failed it back, it looks like that Nurse RN sent it back to me. So I can go ahead and open this up, make sure that they accepted my changes or made the necessary changes that I was requesting, and then I can pass that visit. Now hopefully you guys won't have visits all the way back from 2012 still in validation and compliance. If so, again, maybe your care validation screen is bottlenecking a little bit. If you need additional training on how to maybe help clean up some of your care validation visits that you have in here, or if you need additional training on this subject, definitely give our training department a call and we can set up a time to go over these things with you. Any visit that was completed using point of care is going to show up here in this window. So again, you can customize the different disciplines and types of visits that you want that employee doing the care validation to see. Remember, you can do that by going to Administration and then Groups. And then there's an option in your group settings that actually allow you to choose the specific disciplines or types of visits that you would like them to validate. If not, this does show a master list of basically everything that's ready to be validated. So you may see several different disciplines in here if you choose to not use those group settings to limit what they can see. Once you select your visit and you're ready to validate it from this page, regardless of whether you have the current version or the version 2012 selected, this Validate Visit page always looks the same. So you have your visit information here on the left-hand side. You have your different tabs across the top that could potentially change depending on the type of visit or the discipline that you're validating. You also have an other option here that says Current Version. Clicking on this is just simply going to take you right into that current version view of the software. So this was the first view that we had looked at in today's webinar, where it kind of groups all of those visits that are ready to validate by the type of visit that was being done. Now you also have on your dashboard some different options as far as validation goes, or care validation. Now once you select the little house icon in the upper left-hand corner, that will take you to your dashboard. You also can use the File tab and Dashboard option to get to this same page. In your group settings, for all you administrators that are watching, you can actually assign this case management button or add this case management button to different groups so that specific people have access to it. And what this case management button does is it allows specific users to have visits that are ready to validate. Now this kind of comes into play with some other sections of our system. You'll also be able to see past due visits. We've kind of gone over that. But these ready to validate visits are going to be based off of whether or not you are a supervisor for that particular patient. Okay, so under the patient and patient menu, we actually have an agent tab within that menu, and if you're listed as that case manager or PT, OT, or SD supervisor, you'll actually have the option to validate these visits for your assistants directly from your dashboard. Okay, so when you're clicking on this underlined validate button that's to the right-hand side of these visits, that will actually open up the same page that we had seen actually in that care validation window. So you have your tabs across the top, you have your visit information, and then your option to pass or fail that particular visit. This pass column over to the right-hand side, again, is a quick pass option. And if I click on that, that would just simply immediately pass that visit. Okay, and I have a question that just came in. I'm going to go ahead and have her maybe specify what section she was referring to. It was asking, I believe, if this was the 2012 version or the current. So if you could just specify maybe which page you were talking about and let me know. If you're talking about this Ready to Validate section, this should show up regardless of that version that you have set up in your company settings. As long as you have that agent field filled out in the patient menu, this Ready to Validate section under Case Management should show up. Just to kind of specify the different screens that we've seen, again, when you go to Compliance and Care Validation, the version 2012 is the one where you have your search criteria at the bottom of the page. The current version is the one where you actually have it broken up into different gray colored bars, and it's grouped together by the type of visit that's being done. Now, one other thing that I wanted to mention, just to kind of help you guys run different reports and maybe reference different reports in our report center based on what you're looking for or based on this care validation screen. I'm going to just jump into our report center real quick, and under Reports and Report Center, this will take you in where you can select the type of report that you want to run. Now, for example, we have different statuses of different visits, and we always want to make sure that those visits get in the correct status, especially when our field staff and our clinicians are using the point of care program. Okay. The correct status for a visit that has passed through validation and compliance is once you pass it, it moves into a confirmed status. Okay. Now there are two different statuses that we're kind of talking about once that visit is passed. So to show you guys those statuses, I'm actually going to look at a monthly calendar real quick. Okay. So as you can see here, I just pulled up a monthly calendar by going to Schedule and Monthly Schedule, and I'm actually going to go back a few months so I can find a confirmed visit. Okay. Now, as you can see, we have different colors that show up here on this calendar. At the very bottom, you have different statuses that correspond to the different colors that you see here on your schedule. An unconfirmed, or a visit that's in this green color on this monthly schedule, means that this visit documentation has been done, but the visit is in that care validation screen currently being reviewed. It could also be failed back to the clinician right now, but it's still in that care validation process. Now, once you pass a visit through care validation, it goes into this blue color, which has the status of confirmed. And what that does is it tells the system that basically that visit is completed, it's gone through that care validation process, and it's ready for billing. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to look at one of these visits that's in that blue confirmed color, and I'm going to talk about the different statuses that we have. Okay, so we know it's in a confirmed status. We can view that status by just clicking on the visit and scrolling to the bottom. We see that it's confirmed. Okay. There also is another status that the system actually assigns kind of on the back end as that visit is being confirmed, and that status is located under the Tracking tab at the top of your Edit Charge screen. Now if you scroll down to the bottom of that Tracking tab, you'll see the validation status here, and if it was passed through the care validation screen, this would actually say pass, and it would have a date and time stamp out to the right hand side to basically show us the date and time that that visit was passed through care validation. Now since my visit here is showing up blank for the validation status, what this tells me is that someone has clicked on this visit and they've actually manually selected this confirmed status by using that drop-down box. Now that isn't necessarily a bad thing. That is the correct process if you're manually confirming maybe paper notes that your therapist, if you have contract therapists that are turning in paper notes, or if you have some aides that are documenting their visits on paper and not using the point of care program, you would actually go into the schedule, locate the visit, enter in the time in and time out, and then manually change the status to confirmed. Okay, so you may from time to time see one that actually has a confirmed status, and then under that Tracking tab has a blank tracking status or validation status. Now if it was passed through validation and compliance, let's actually see if I can find one real quick. Let me go back a few months. Okay, so as you can see here, when I click on that visit, I'll go through the steps again, maybe not so quickly, but I'm in my calendar, I'm selecting that blue visit just by clicking on it. I scroll down on this first tab and I see it's in a confirmed status. And when I click on the Tracking tab and scroll down, I also see my validation status as pass. Out to the right-hand side, it shows me the date and time that that visit was actually passed through the care validation screen. And then the visit status actually shows me the date and time that that visit was actually completed. Okay, you can click on View Signatures if you actually needed to review those signatures that were on that visit. If you needed to actually send the visit back to the care validation screen, let's say you accidentally passed the wrong visit, once you're in this Edit Charge screen, you want to click on the Tracking tab and change this validation status to blank. Okay, it does let you know that it's already been passed, and letting you know if you change it to fail or blank, it's going to take it out of the patient's medical record. It could duplicate or will duplicate any plan of care or OASIS documents if it was an OASIS visit. Okay, but we are going to go ahead and change the status to blank so that we can send it back over to that care validation screen and actually review it if we need to. Now again, if you're wanting to send it back to care validation, validation status needs to be blank, but we also need to click on our Basics tab, and we also need to change this status from confirmed to unconfirmed, because unconfirmed, remember, is the status that those visits are in when they're actually in that care validation process. Okay, once we've set this status to unconfirmed, and we've also set that validation status to blank instead of pass, we're going to click Submit. I'm going to just click Submit past that warning, and you'll now see it showing up green here on your calendar. And if we were to go back into Compliance and Care Validation, we would actually see that visit back in Care Validation, so we could actually go in and then review it or fail it back to that clinician to make any changes. Now, we don't recommend doing that a whole lot just because you do have those two different statuses that you need to change, and you want to always make sure you get them in the correct status. But again, if you accidentally pass a visit and you need to send it back, that is an option. Now, that being said, you always want to make sure that your visits are in the correct status. Now, if you're using the care validation screen, then it should be automatically assigning those correct statuses and the correct status combination. So let's kind of look at some different status combinations that you may see. Okay, so for example, this visit right now is green, so it's in care validation waiting to be validated. What that means is that the status is unconfirmed, but that validation status is blank. Okay, so when we click on it, that just verifies it. It is in an unconfirmed status. On our Tracking tab, the validation status is blank. Okay, that is an appropriate status combination. Okay, you also may see visits that are in an unconfirmed status, so unconfirmed here, but if you look at the Tracking tab, the validation status is fail. Now what that means is, again, that visit is still in that care validation screen, but the status is set to fail, so we know that it's currently failed back to the clinician or in that failed status because some changes or corrections were being made. Okay, so again, unconfirmed and blank and unconfirmed and fail are two correct status combinations. Okay. Now you also have a pass option here for the validation status. Now pass means that the visit was actually passed through validation or through that care validation screen. Okay, if you see a visit that is in an unconfirmed status and has a pass status also, that is an incorrect status combination. And so what probably happened is that somebody saw that visit on the schedule and maybe tried to send it back to validation or back to that care validation screen to review, but they just changed this status. Maybe they forgot to go in and actually change the tracking status. Okay, so unconfirmed and pass is an incorrect status combination. Now for a confirmed visit, remember, confirmed visits can be passed through that care validation screen, or a confirmed visit may be a paper note that was actually manually set to confirmed so that you could bill it electronically through our system, even though it wasn't actually completed electronically through our point-of-care program. So there are two correct status combinations for a confirmed visit. Okay, a confirmed visit is either going to be confirmed and then have the validation status of pass, or it's going to be confirmed and have the validation status of blank, which means basically, or what it tells you is that basically that was a paper note that most likely was manually confirmed, meaning that someone selected that visit from the calendar and manually changed the status from scheduled to confirmed. Okay. If you ever see a visit that is in a confirmed and fail status, that's an incorrect status combination, and so you want to make sure that you maybe look into why it's set to confirmed and fail. Okay, most of the time when we see those, that means that someone just accidentally came in here and manually changed that status to confirmed instead of actually passing it through that care validation screen. Okay. So what we're going to do, or what we were going to look at in our report center, is actually going to be a report that will help us locate those incorrect status combinations. This is a good way just for administrators to be able to go in and make sure that those visits are being passed correctly and that everything is in the correct combination that it needs to be in. Okay, so again, I'm going to go into Reports and Report Center. And the report that I'm going to choose is going to be a charges report. Okay. Now our charges report is a fairly large report, so don't be too overwhelmed with the filter options and things like that that we have available. The first section is just going to be your select fields to include. These are going to be your different columns that you see going across the very top of your page. So when you print out this report or when you look at it, your different columns that you have showing are going to be based on what you have checked here. Okay. If you have more than one branch office and you're running this report wide open based on those branch offices, you may want to leave this first box checked, which is for provider. I'm going to uncheck P-code and payer because I probably don't need the payer information. I just want to go through and run this report just to verify that all of my visits are in the correct status. I'm going to leave the date of service and the last and first name because that's the last and first name of my patient. I'm also going to leave the MR number just in case I still have some visits for a previous patient account. That way my MR number, I can easily identify those readmits and which patient it actually is. I'm also going to leave my agent box selected, and I'm going to leave my service description box selected so that I can easily see what type of visit it was. I'm going to uncheck service code because that's just an abbreviation of the actual description usually, and I'm going to uncheck IP facility. Ordered, created, created by, edited, edited by, and I'm going to uncheck notes. I'm even going to uncheck the POD just for this report purpose. POD is proof of delivery. A lot of the times when you are manually checking in or manually confirming those paper notes, we recommend that you set that proof of delivery to yes, because you have proof that the service was delivered. You actually have that paper note in your hand. There are some different filter options that your billers may need to utilize if you're not changing that proof of delivery to yes when you're actually checking in or confirming those paper notes. But that'll be something we can talk about a little bit later in some billing training. So the only thing I'm leaving selected is provider, date of service, last, first, MR, service description, agent, status, and validation status. Now these two, status and validation status, are going to be our most important ones that we're looking at. Okay, and then here under my sorting options, I can sort it alphabetically if I want to, or I can sort it by the date of service. I'm actually going to put in date of service so it'll actually pull in with my oldest date of service at the very top. You can choose ascending or descending order. So if you want your oldest date of service at the bottom, you can just kind of change these accordingly. But what these sorting options do is just group all of those different charges a little bit differently. Okay, so right now I have it set to group them together by the date of service. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll through a lot of these filter options. If you want to, once you get down to the date of service, you can actually change or enter in a date range if you're wanting to just run it for a specific date range. You may want to, if you're running this report for the first time, you may want to just run it wide open. Then you can run it maybe on a weekly or monthly basis just to make sure that everything is being done correctly. But the main statuses we're going to be looking at is the charge status and the validation status. So once you get down to those two on your filter options, go ahead and stop. I'm going to use my magnifying glass to find my statuses that I want. Now I'm not going to run this based on the correct status combinations. I want to actually run this report based on those incorrect status combinations that we had talked about. Okay, so let's start with our confirmed visits first. I'm going to choose confirmed, click submit, and for my validation status, I'm going to choose fail, because remember, a visit should never be in a confirmed status and a failed status. Okay, and then I'm going to scroll down to the bottom and click submit. Now hopefully this would not show any records, but I see I have one particular visit for Elvis Presley, and it is in a confirmed and fail status. So this would be a visit that I'd want to go back and actually look at to make sure that it wasn't accidentally changed to a confirmed status before it was passed through validation and compliance, or passed through care validation. Okay, once I'm done reviewing that, hopefully that would be 0. I'm actually going to go back to my filter options. I did that just by closing that report window that had opened up. And I'm going to change my statuses now because I'm going to look for another status. Okay, so I'm going to choose unconfirmed. And then my validation status, I'm going to choose pass. Okay, because this is my next incorrect status option, okay, or status combination, and I'm going to click submit. Okay, and it looks like I have 5 records here that are in an unconfirmed and pass status. So what this probably tells me is that maybe these visits were in validation and compliance, or I'm sorry, in care validation. We've changed up the terminology a little bit, so I apologize, I keep saying validation and compliance. These visits are still in care validation, or maybe they were passed through care validation a little too early, or maybe on accident. And so what this looks like is maybe an employee has tried to actually send it back to that care validation, but they forgot to change this status. Okay, so these would be visits that you would want to go in, and most likely these are visits that still need to be in that care validation window for review. So this probably needs to be changed to blank or fail. I always recommend changing it to blank so you can get that visit to show back up in care validation, and then actually failing it from that care validation window with any changes that you needed to make. Okay, hopefully you guys followed me. I know that was quite a bit of steps that we just went through right now. Hopefully you'll get some use out of that report. I think it's a good one for administrators to run, again, just to follow up and make sure that everything is being passed through the system the correct way. If you have any questions about these reports or about any other steps that we talked about, maybe sending a visit back to validation, just call in and let our training team know, and we can quickly walk you through those different steps that you need to take. We will also have a webinar on this Thursday about auditing. Auditing and our compliance tab, our care validation window, kind of go hand in hand. Our audit tab is going to actually be useful probably as well to some people that may have also been doing that care validation function for their agency. So if you guys can attend that at 10 o'clock on Thursday, make sure that you register for that webinar. And again, if you have any questions, let us know. But that is all I have for you this morning. I don't see any additional questions here on our list, so keep an eye out for this video and a list of questions for today, and we will, I guess, talk to you guys on Thursday. Thanks for watching.